Hello, welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we'll be reviewing Sing Sing. In prison for a crime he didn't commit, Divine G finds purpose by acting in a theater group alongside other incarcerated men, including a wary newcomer. Sing Sing is directed by Greg Kwedar and stars Colman, Domingo, Clarence, Maclin, Divine G, and many, many more. So Matt, what'd you think of Sing Sing?
So this film is based on The Sing Sing Follies by John H. Richardson. And as you mentioned in the little intro, it follows a group of inmates that are at the Sing Sing Correctional Facility in New York. So this film is based on a real place and has real people in it. Besides, I think one of the lead actors being Colman Domingo and maybe a supporting actor or two, the rest of these actors are actually former inmates, and a few of them had actually been in this program at Sing Sing Correctional Facility. And so this program is called the Rehabilitation Through the Arts program. Let me tell you, the actors in this film, all these inmate actors, they are fantastic.
Yeah,
they are very good in this film. And at the center of this story, you have Clarence Maclin, who plays opposite Colman Domingo in the film. And it's through his eyes that we get to experience how the program shapes him from a man who is lost in a cycle he believes he's unable to escape to someone who works through their feelings and takes on newfound control in their life. At its very core, Sing Sing is a film about the healing and redemptive power of the arts, but it's also putting a spotlight on how these rehabilitation programs can reduce recidivism for those that partake. And I must say, I really, really enjoyed it. It's an immensely realistic and grounded film. It was wholesome, insightful, and generally filled with a sense of optimism, with the exception for a few moments, I would say.
Sing Sing is a film that's really powerfully acted, and I lead with that because it's the film's most obvious positive, and I think elevates it sometimes when it gets off pace a little bit. But generally speaking, it's a film that's really, really interested in pathos, emotional and heartfelt scenes of these men relating to one another through art they're conducting on stage is among the most important things in the film. It's a film I really liked a lot and really truly did get me in the feels, so to speak, pretty often, but I think has maybe some issues with the connective tissue of some of those scenes. Essentially, this is a film with a multitude of beautiful and really heartrending portraits of humanity, with particular focus on what's lost in these men's lives as they're incarcerated and serving their time. There's an amazing scene later in the film where a former inmate comes back to visit and talks about how his dog was the happiest to see him out of everyone in the family. And that scene had an overwhelming sense of melancholy originating from the hardship of reintegration on that level. Questions of like, will you have the same friends? Will your family forgive you and accept you again? These are all questions that the film very realistically and I think very admirably explores. I have some quibbles that I'll get into, but to reduce it to its most fundamental intentions as a film, I think it seeks to bring humanity to a part of the population that frankly doesn't get humanized very often. I think that's a really admirable thing.
On that note, you were talking about how the film is really focused on these actors and it's really a character portrait. I will say, though, that I really liked how this film was shot, because I think how it's shot really complements and enhances those performances because it's not taking away from them. It's a very specific choice. The film is mostly handheld with the exception of a few static shots during some emotional moments, but I really like how this filming style complements the gritty, grounded nature of the film. This movie is entirely service of these people and their stories. So there isn't really anything flashy being done with the camera work that would really pull our attention away from that. And that's why I liked it so much.
Yeah, so like even though this film has some potential Oscar prospects, it's not a movie that I'd expect be nominated for cinematography. And I don't think that that's like a bad thing. I don't think the film looks poorly at all. It makes a very intentional decision to kind of take that out of the equation, as you were talking about. So Colman Domingo is absolutely electric in this movie. In every scene of this movie, I'd be shocked if this doesn't end up being one of my favorite performances of this year. I had heard in some reviews or just through people talking about this film that he has a big Oscar scene in the movie, but he's electric in like every second.
Yeah, I would say there's multiple scenes like that.
There's a scene early on where he brings Divine Eye aside to talk about manhood and anger with him. It's an extraordinary scene, all the more so because what's written on the page is kind of these obvious platitudes. Like, it's not my favorite writing in the film. Two actors deliver such classically intense and emotive performances, it's impossible to look away from it. It makes it an extraordinary scene. His range in this film, from a charismatic leader to a high-class intellectual to a wounded martyr, like, I don't have enough compliments for him, frankly. I think it's just like an extraordinary performance.
Yeah, and going from his performance to Clarence Maclin's, there is this similar overlay between the two, and the best way I could describe this is this monologue that overlaps between both of them from Hamlet, and that is the to be or not to be, that is the question thing. Very early in the film, we get Colman Domingo's version of it, and right there, you're just like, holy Like that was fantastic. And when you find out that Clarence Maclin is going for that role because he wants to say that monologue, it's very early in the film and his heart doesn't really seem in it, but he's also interested in it. So you know there's something there.
Yep.
But you're like, how on earth can he top Colman Domingo's version? And he really pulls it through and crushes it during his moment in the film.
It's really funny that they use that monologue from Hamlet, or technically it's like a soliloquy, but whatever. We hear this monologue many times in the film, and I always say putting that soliloquy in a film in any context is really, really ballsy, because it's the most widely known soliloquy in all of Shakespeare. Like, you don't read a lot of Shakespeare, but I'm sure you know a good portion of that monologue, and you have to do it perfectly and uniquely, and this film chooses to do it perfectly and uses that monologue to show that character's evolution, which I really liked. The first time he delivers it, it's so flat that you watch it evolve slightly scene to scene, but making that monologue work over and over within the context of his characterization, I think was a really brilliant move.
That's what actually goes into something that I really enjoyed about the film, is that the level of acting ability that all these additional characters have really expresses itself the longer the film progresses. Like in Clarence Maclin's character, we're seeing an evolution. So you don't really understand how great his acting is at the beginning until you see that evolution happening right in front of your eyes. But going from there, I really also want to talk about some other actors' performances that I really enjoyed in this film, and that includes the performances of Sean San Jose and Sean Dino Johnson. Both have what I consider absolutely spellbinding scenes, including Sean San Jose's final scene in the film, which takes place in a conversation between his character and Colman Domingo's character. And this is really just some powerful emotional acting going on here. And the other being Sean Dino Johnson's scene during rehearsal, when he addresses Maclin's character. Sean is there to really put things in balance, really remind him what he's there for. And also, besides that scene, he is such a pleasant presence in the film throughout it. He's so funny. There's a level of like humanity and love behind his eyes that you just constantly see sprinkled throughout this film that I really, really enjoyed. But these two moments that I just mentioned in particular are filled with so much depth, and you could see how their life experiences reflect in their performances.
Yeah, I agree. I love that the film uses that technique of people who had that real lived-in experience that brought to the roles. I'll talk about this a little later too, but it reminds me a little bit of Nomadland, how Nomadland used... Nomads, yeah, travelers. I forget what the term was. I have to say, I know this is going to sound mean, but this doesn't strike me as a film that's particularly well-directed. I
disagree.
I know that sounds odd because so much of it is emotionally resonant, and the collaboration between actor and director is a huge part of direction, so I don't want to discount that. But I think the film is paced kind of poorly. I love its tight runtime. I love how it's powerful for a good portion of the runtime, but there's a certain inelegance to the way that it reveals information. There's really notable in a late scene where it's revealed one of the members passed away from a brain aneurysm. That information, I think, is introduced really oddly. Like, there's not a lot of tonal buildup within the film or poetic exploration following it, but also the film quickly introduces the clemency hearing and the parole hearings of our two main characters, and both of those scenes are basically over before they even start. They feel devoid of development in my mind. I think the film makes a decision to divorce itself from context, which is a storytelling tool that I usually really like, especially in thrillers or psychological dramas. But I think it's a strange decision for a drama that's leaning on pathos to deliver power. For instance, we learn some details about the characters, whether they have children or not. We see small glimpses of Colman Domingo's character on the phone, etc., but not enough. Most of these emotional scenes are the inmates discussing these very relatable memories or fantasies, and as touched as I am by those scenes and as great as they are, I couldn't help but feel as if the film is like a series of scenes and not really a film. This context thing is clearly a choice because I think the film uses the same tactic with politics. It's explored in this cursory faction that quickly acknowledges disadvantage but little else. In some ways, I'm thankful for that because I don't think this patent political monologue would work in the context of this film. But in that way, robbing us of context dulls the power of characterization, in my opinion. I think the film and its pacing is almost too tight when allowing a little time to breathe and a little poetry surrounding a revelation could have done a lot. I mentioned this before, but the film actually oddly reminds me of Nomadland, an intimate improvisation to it all that makes you feel like you're viewing reality, which is great, and that has a true emotional benefit, but it's also hard to decipher craftsmanship when you're using that as a technique.
I see what you mean. It definitely was clearly intentional because the film has slight commentaries on like the criminal justice system, for example. We get that scene where Colman Domingo's character is being interviewed and he gets that really blunt question, is he acting now? Which is pretty harsh. Then we get the scene right at the end when Colman Domingo's leaving, that he sees a younger man who has just arrived in the jail cell next to him.
Yeah.
I think there's these little things that are sprinkled in there. I agree that it's not necessarily really going for that, and I think that's very intentional, but I don't know. It didn't bother me that much.
Yeah, I think it could have given us a little bit more without having like going full blown into extreme context.
I will say the film could have actually been longer.
I agree.
I could have watched more of this. I could have watched more of these people and learning about them and seeing their growth.
I have a question for you, but it kind of involves spoilers. So if you have not seen Sing Sing, I think it's a movie that can't really be spoiled in my opinion. But if you're sensitive about spoilers and you have not seen the film, you may want to come back to this portion of the review. What did you think of them not showing the final performance?
I actually really, really like it. And I don't think it was necessary to show the performance because we get a lot of the performance before that scene when they're doing the rehearsals. It would have just been repetitive, I guess. I think that final scene is actually a great descriptor for them making it. Like their journey is complete. So there's not really much more that we need to see. So them walking off into the light on the stage is like, we did it.
That's exactly what I thought of it. There wasn't anything left up to the performance that they needed to realize while they were performing. Showing the performance would have been unnecessarily tedious. I really like that they omitted it, actually.
But we did see some of the performance, which was really hilarious.
Yeah.
Also, that's actually makes a great point because at the end of the film, there's credits. And you want to stick around for a little bit of the credits if you haven't seen the movie yet.
Yeah, they're great.
They show all these scenes, all this real life footage from all of them partaking in Sing Sing and other theater groups in different correctional facilities. These were really fun to watch because you see the influences on the film.
Yeah, I agree.
So you ready to go to grade?
I am. I'm going to give Sing Sing a B+. I thought it was mostly lovely. I know that I had some like quibbles with the direction and some of the choices it made, but overall, I mean, I felt very engaged with this film and I was very emotionally affected by it. So many individual scenes are just really great. And this is the type of film that I think will get some Oscar buzz. I know that it's having a slow rollout now, but once this hits a streaming service, it's an A24 film, so it will be on Max eventually. I think once it hits a streaming service around the Oscars or whenever it does, I have a feeling that mainstream audiences are really going to like this film. We always talk about this during Oscar season, but this is like the Oscar film that you can take your parents to. Yeah. They'll really like it. And I think even more so than that, I hope that this shines a light on people to be a little less judgmental of people who are in the prison system. And that's really what the film is intending to do. So I think it's quite successful in that.
Yeah, my ending's going to be a little repetitive, but when you said that whole bit, I was like, oh, I'm pretty much saying the same thing. Completely agree. I think this is a must-see watch, and I do think it's going to do well in the Oscars. I hope for that. But that being said, I give this film an A-. I really loved it. I think one of the film's most meaningful attributes is the way it shines a light on the humanity of incarcerated individuals. In a world where people are very hasty to judge others, a la what you just said, this film really leads with empathy and respect from the very beginning. And I think that benefits the film really well because in turn, we are really rewarded with a complex and intimate portrait of these individuals.
Yeah, I agree. And we actually didn't mention this during the review, but this is funny too because I was complaining about how the film doesn't have context. But one thing I really like that it omitted is we don't really learn why people are incarcerated in this film. It doesn't allow us to even have the ability to judge them. We can't judge them for what they did or didn't do because we don't know. We're just looking at the people in front of us. So I really like that choice. And that's it for a review of Sing Sing, which is now in theaters. It's on a slow rollout, so it should be coming to your city pretty soon. We highly recommend going to see it. So let us know what you thought of Sing Sing in the comments below, and we will see you next time.